Today we'll be recapping the action-adventure movie, Venom. Spoilers ahead. The movie opens up with a ship from space crashing into East Malaysia during re-entry. Funded by the Life Foundation, its cargo contains some unknown life forms known as symbiotes. Despite the organization's best efforts, they only managed to retrieve 3 of 4 originally on board. At the crash site, one of the astronauts is found alive. Unaware that the astronaut has been possessed by the missing symbiote, he's rushed off in an ambulance, where he brutally mauls the other passengers. The symbiote then changes hosts and walks off into the unknown. In San Francisco, California, reporter Eddie Brock is woken up by his fiancée, Anne. While Anne's a successful lawyer, Eddie's a hotshot reporter that takes a more carefree approach to life. One day, his boss Jack assigns him with an interview with Carlton Drake, head of the Life Foundation, to which Eddie protests. Drake's a billionaire that claims to be an environmentalist, but Eddie knows better and labels the man a crook. Unfortunately, Eddie's boss doesn't give him a choice in the matter. Drake has the money and the assets to get whatever he wants, so Eddie has to reluctantly agree. Later that night, Eddie enjoys a date night with Anne, where he vents about his assignment. Anne's firm works for Drake, and neither of them are a fan. Anne worries that Eddie will cross the line during the interview and get run out of San Francisco, something that happened previously in New York. Eddie brushes off her concerns, and the two go on to enjoy the date. That night, while Anne's asleep, Eddie notices a notification on her laptop. His curiosity gets the better of him, and he opens up the confidential email. It's a wrongful death claim from the Life Foundation. 3 of their test subjects have died, and they want to ensure that they are not held responsible. The next day, Eddie arrives for the interview, buttering Drake up with his life accomplishments. Since Drake was 19, he's been able to make leaps and bounds in the medical industry. Drake initially buys into it. But then Eddie takes a turn. While he's there to interview Drake about the new rocket, he instead begins to accuse Drake of killing people for his own gain. Drake has a history of using weaker people to test his new medical findings, and Eddie's more interested in that story than some rocket that he's built. These allegations upset Drake, who cuts the interview short and kicks Eddie out of the building. Back at the office, Eddie's lectured by Jack for his actions at the Life Foundation. Before we go on, like the video, smash the subscribe button, and turn on that notification bell to join our expendable squad. Jack tells Eddie that, despite his talents as a reporter, he's dumb and careless. Jack can't trust Eddie and fires him. At the same time, Anne is fired from her firm for leaking confidential information. This is the straw that breaks the camel's back, and Anne decides she can no longer put up with it. She returns Eddie's ring and calls off their wedding. At the Life Foundation, Drake receives his shipment of symbiotes. Meanwhile, back in Malaysia, the symbiote possessing the paramedic massacres an entire crowd before changing hosts once again. 6 months later, Drake has been doing a number of tests with the symbiotes. He's discovered that in order for them to survive on Earth, they need a matching host. His theory is that if the symbiotes fuse with organisms on Earth to survive, then humans could fuse with symbiotes to survive in space. Despite the protests of scientist Dr. Skirth, Drake pushes for human trials regardless of the unethical implications. At a local bar, Eddie drinks himself into a depression. He's given up the life of a reporter, believing he's thoroughly ruined his life. As he watches Drake announce his latest project on the news, Eddie's reminded of everything he lost for the sake of a big scoop and leaves the bar alone. On the way home, Eddie heads to a convenience store. Outside, he generously gives a homeless woman, Maria, some money. Despite his losses, he's still a good man at heart. Inside the store, Eddie talks to his friend, Mrs. Chen. They banter back and forth about relaxation methods before a man robs her at gunpoint. Eddie is forced to watch. Since his separation with Anne, Eddie has moved into a rundown apartment with unfriendly neighbors. Sirens go off outside his window and he's past due on a number of bills. After the incident with Drake, he's been blacklisted and struggles to find work. In an attempt to relax, he tries to listen to a therapeutic CD but can't because of his neighbor's extremely loud music. Eddie wants to ask him to turn it down, but is too kind of a person to do so. Instead, he goes to sleep with the music blaring. At the Life Foundation, Drake has begun testing on humans. The first subject is a man named Isaac. Drake comments on his biblical name and states that while God may have abandoned him, he won't. Drake truly believes himself to be on the same level as God, and as such, plays with the lives of his test subjects. He releases the symbiote on Isaac, but it quickly kills him. Completely unfazed by Isaac's death, he simply calls in for the next test subject. On Eddie's routine trip to Mrs. Chen's convenience store, he notices Maria's missing, and he's being followed. Aware of his stalker, Eddie manages to expose the follower as Dr. Skirth. She tries to tell him about the details of the inhumane testing that Drake has been doing, but Eddie doesn't want to hear it. She begs for his help, but Eddie makes it clear that he's done playing the White Knight. His one encounter with Drake cost him his entire life, and he warns her that she should keep her head low and find someone else to handle her problems. Eddie walks past his old home when he runs into Anne and her new boyfriend, Dan, a doctor. The two men share an awkward interaction before Dan heads inside Anne's home with his own key. Eddie tries to make small talk, but Anne shuts it down, claiming that all of this is his fault. Eddie's walking the streets of San Francisco before he finds himself staring at the Life Institute facility from the Golden Gate Bridge. In that moment, he decides that he's got nothing else to lose and makes the call to Dr. Skirth. Skirth sneaks Eddie into the facility and explains the true purpose of Drake's rockets. The pollution and overpopulation of the Earth is leading humanity into its downfall, and Drake believes that their future is in the stars. She reveals that during a probing mission they found life on a comet, the symbiotes. As a security officer walks by, Skirth goes on to distract him while Eddie proceeds to the lab alone. In the lab, Eddie finds a number of gruesome and grisly sights. A carcass of a symbiote and a dead test subject lay on the floor lifeless. In one of the test pods, Eddie finds Maria. She begs Eddie for help and, in a panic, Eddie sets off an alarm, causing Maria to be sprayed down in what can be assumed to be liquid nitrogen. Eddie breaks the glass to free her, but she pounces on him, transferring the symbiote to Eddie before she collapses dead. Eddie's forced to leave her and make a run for the exit. During Eddie's escape, he notices that he's gained a significant amount of strength. He's suddenly able to bust through walls and fight off guards with ease. The guards chase Eddie into the woods and, with the help of his new powers, he escapes up a tree undetected. At Eddie's apartment, he grows ravenous and eats everything in sight. He even resorts to eating out of the garbage before he pukes everything up into the toilet. At the lab, Drake is furious that one of the symbiotes is missing. Unaware that Skirth was the one to let the intruder into the facility, he sends his men out to find the intruder. The night, however, wasn't a complete disaster. One of the test subjects was able to stabilize and merge with his symbiote. At the apartment, Eddie comes to his senses and reflects on the wild night he just had. Elsewhere, the missing symbiote that has been jumping from host to host has found itself in California and targets a little girl as its next host. Eddie's still shaken from the events at the lab and is concerned for Skirth's safety. He tries to make a call to get the news out, but is troubled by a second voice in his head, which tells him to eat. Eddie eventually finds Anne and Dan at a restaurant to tell them about his findings, but the ravenous hunger from the symbiote takes him over, and he causes a scene in the restaurant. He tries to eat a steak, but the voice craves living flesh. He settles for live lobsters in the tank. To save the situation, Dan apologizes for Eddie's behavior and claims him as his patient. After the events of the restaurant, Dan takes Eddie to get checked out, but when he's scanned for an MRI, the symbiote freaks out, forcing the test to end. Dan writes it off as a case of claustrophobia and sends Eddie home. At the lab, Skirth is identified as the leak. To make matters worse, the test subject that merged with the symbiote is slowly dying, despite Drake's best attempts. When Eddie gets home, he's called by Anne and Dan. They tell him that he's got a virus, and that it would explain the abnormalities he's been feeling. Dan suggests that the voices he's hearing are hallucinations as well. It's Dan's beliefs that a few antibiotics will clear it all up and get Eddie back to normal. After Eddie hangs up, the neighbor plays loud music once again. This time, however, Eddie's agitated and brave enough to approach him and tell him to turn it down. While the neighbor initially ignores Eddie, he quickly listens after the symbiote shows its frightening face. In the lab, Drake approaches Skirth about her betrayal, He lies to her and tells her that she can trust him. Feeling concerned, she reveals that it was Eddie that she brought into the lab. With all the information that he wanted, Drake thanks her and unleashes a symbiote to finish her off. At Eddie's apartment, Drake's security guards come for him, but the symbiote takes over against Eddie's will. A number of armed men come for him and, one by one, Eddie apologetically knocks them all out. The symbiote suggests to eat them all, but instead the two make an escape out the window. When Drake's given the news, he's stunned that Eddie has achieved symbiosis and is further fueled with the desire to capture him. In an alley, Eddie believes that he's hallucinating everything, but at that moment, Drake's men find him. A chase occurs, and Eddie speeds through town with the help of the symbiote, achieving impossible maneuvers on his motorcycle. The symbiote takes complete control and saves Eddie a number of times before the chase comes to an end, with Eddie being blindsided and thrown off the bike. With Eddie crippled by the accident, Drake and his men are positive that they got him cornered, until the symbiote begins to overtake Eddie's body. Now completely immersed within the alien, Eddie's fully healed and stands as a monster among men. It's only by the efforts of the police that Eddie doesn't consume Drake's men. Together, as symbiote and host, Eddie escapes into the bay to safety. In awe of what just happened, Eddie takes note of his healed limbs and begins to converse with his parasite. It introduces itself as Venom and explains that he and Eddie are now one. Everything Eddie knows, it also knows. And with Eddie's cooperation, they can take down Drake together. The missing symbiote has now arrived in San Francisco as a little girl and gets a call from Dan. He's received the results back from the MRI and tells her that whatever's happening to Eddie is much worse than they originally expected. He wants Eddie in the hospital as soon as possible. Panicked by the news, Anne attempts to call Eddie, but he's not answering. At the Life Foundation, Skirth's body's lifeless on the floor. Unable to properly merge together, the symbiote has died. With the loss of yet another sample, Venom becomes the last known symbiote. In the wake of Eddie's pursuit around the city, the police are on high alert and still can't reach him. Eddie and Venom try to get into his old office to submit the evidence on Drake, but they're denied access in the front. So instead, Venom takes over and scales the building for him. The two nearly fall to their death when a plane flies overhead, disrupting Venom, but they manage to survive. Eddie drops the evidence on his former employer's desk and decides to take the elevator down. On his way out, Eddie's met by dozens of armed men with rifles and smoke grenades. He tries to warn them not to fight, but they choose to engage anyway. The smoke grenades only lead to their own downfall as Venom uses it as cover to systematically take them all down, one by one. For a moment, the men seem to be winning with flash grenades, but things quickly swing back to Eddie's favor, and he manages to come out on top. Anne arrives and witnesses the massacre. Eddie manages to stop himself, and after explaining that he's scared, Anne convinces him to go to the hospital with her. On their way to the hospital, Venom talks to Anne through Eddie and explains that it's particularly sensitive to sound and fire. At the Life Foundation, the little girl hosting the missing symbiote confronts Drake. Initially confused, Drake approaches her before getting possessed by it himself. At the hospital, Dan tells Eddie that Venom is killing him from the inside out. Anne and Dan push Venom to leave Eddie alone. And it's only after Anne turns on the MRI machine that Venom leaves Eddie's body, finally separating him. Eddie walks out in anger, feeling betrayed by Venom. In the midst of a conversation between Dan and Anne, Venom escapes through a vent. Crawling through a vent, Venom takes over a dog to survive. Eddie's captured by Drake's men. At the Life Foundation, Drake confronts Eddie. He's successfully merged with the missing symbiote, Riot, and the two have made a deal to lead the humans and symbiotes together. Without Venom, Eddie's of no use to Drake. He has his men take Eddie away to be killed. Drake's men take Eddie deep into the woods to dispose of him, but before they finish the job, Venom and Anne come to save him. The two merge together to save Eddie, and together they consume the head of Drake's security. Venom and kisses Eddie, and through the kiss, Venom merges with Eddie once again. Venom explains that Riot is a team leader of the group of symbiotes, and that he's very strong. They must stop him before the rocket launches, or he'll bring the rest of his kind back to Earth. At the Life Foundation, the spacecraft is being prepped for launch. Drake intends to fly it himself. When Eddie asks Venom why he's helping him, Venom explains that, with his kind, he's a loser like Eddie. He wants to stay because together on Earth they can be something more together. Against the wishes of his scientists, Drake initiates launch. Venom notes that Riot is one of the strongest symbiotes there is, and it's unlikely that they can beat him, but they fight him anyway. Riot and Venom destroy everything in their path as they battle. The two rip each other apart, and at one point, Riot rips Venom right off of Eddie. Eddie manages to re-merge with Venom, but the two are absorbed by Riot and almost taken out. It's only thanks to Anne on the speaker system that the four beings separate. Eddie and Drake get in a fist fight, and Eddie seemingly wins, but is impaled in the back by Riot. Luckily, Venom merges with him to save him in time. Venom climbs the rocket, sabotaging it with Riot's own weapon, causing the rocket to catch on fire and finally killing Riot. Eddie free falls into the bay. Venom seemingly sacrifices himself in order to save Eddie. Sometime later, Eddie and Anne talk on the front steps of Anne's house. Anne has begun working as a lawyer again, and Eddie is back to being a reporter. Anne tells Eddie that Dan can't know about their kiss, to which Venom replies in Eddie's head that he and Eddie will get her back. He survived the fire, and now they're working together again in secret, under the condition that Venom only hurts bad people. The movie ends with the new anti-hero Venom eating the robber that frequently bullies Mrs. Chen's, indicating that Eddie and Venom have truly become one. Venom was a 2018 Sony movie with lead actor Tom Hardy. Would you guys be okay with Venom living inside you? Let us know in those comments with #CinemaRecap.